get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Hi. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to give folks a few more minutes to jump in here, and then we will get started. Good morning. Good morning. I'm excited to have all of you all here. Good morning. Hi, Tempest. Good morning, y'all. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to jump in, and then I'm going to get started. Seeing if I can get this up live. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. We'll get started in just a few minutes. I'm going to give folks an opportunity to get in here, to get settled before we dive in. If you have questions that you want to bring into the space today, please go ahead and drop them on the chat box. And I will try to scroll through them before we start, and then I'll also scroll through them at the end to make sure that I get everyone's questions answered. Thank you all for being here today. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I am super excited to be back for day 2 of this Q&A conversation around pleasure is our fuel, not a reward. My name is Rashida KhanBey Miller. My pronouns are she, her, and temptress. And I love all of them, so please, you can also just call me Rashi. I really love being called Rashi as well. So I want to actually start off today a little bit different and start with a meditation. So go ahead and close your eyes. Try to plant your feet on the floor if you are sitting, on your bed, or maybe you're sitting on the couch or something. I want you to go ahead and elongate your spine, pulling up almost like you have a string coming from the top of your head. So I really want you to activate your body for this conversation. So if you're sitting down, plant your feet firmly on the floor, give yourself a little bit of space in between your knees. Make sure you really feel your hips kind of sinking into your chair. And if you are, and then also pull yourself up, like you have a string coming from the top of your head and it's pulling you up towards the ceiling, and you just feel your spine moving from a curved position to a straight, more activated position. Once you find yourself in that space, I want you to go ahead and take a deep breath in and exhale. Take another deep breath in and exhale. One more time, deep breath in and exhale. You woke up this morning. You woke up this morning. This is a new day. You woke up this morning. And that means that there's plenty of opportunities, plenty of spaces, plenty of moments for you to try something new today. It doesn't matter what happened yesterday. It doesn't matter what happened 5 minutes ago. It doesn't matter what happened last week. It doesn't matter what happened last year. You woke up this day. How can you use today as an opportunity to step closer to the things that you're wanting and desiring for yourself? How can you use this day as an opportunity to truly activate a sense of self-reverence? How can you use this day to really tap into the needs and desires that you have? How can you use this day to be more truthful with yourself? How can you use this day to breathe a little more deeply, to let some shit go, to stop being so hard on yourself, to give yourself a lot more grace, to recognize that we're all navigating through terrain that we've never really been through? And how can you come back to this truth that you woke up this day? So there's more life left for you to live, and not just to survive through, but to find ways to thrive and feel radiant and to feel alive and to feel pleasurable and to feel joy again on this day. Take a deep breath in and exhale. One more time, deep breath in and exhale. Thank y'all so much for joining me for this experience. I am, as I said yesterday, showing up to do live conversations is really, it just makes me like, everything is in the moment. It's very different from teaching an in-person class because you get a chance to kind of feel and sense the energy of the folks around you, and you can move and shift through the space in that way. But this, format and conversation is very much so, it's just different. And so I'm grateful for you all being here. I'm excited to find new ways to bring these conversations into the space. And I hope that you find something beneficial in this space, and whatever doesn't feel in alignment with your journey, with your ideas, with your desires, with your goals, with your practice at this point in your life. You know, I highly believe in this idea that was shared with me by an old mentor. It's like, take the meat and spit out the bones. Like, whatever feels like it's an alignment for you, whatever feels like it's an affirmation for what you're looking for today, take that. And then everything else, leave it. That might not be your part. That might not be part of your thing right now. And that's okay. I really want to center this conversation in the idea that you are the guru in your own life. You are your best teacher. You are your greatest wisdom. You are your own, you know, your own prophetic voice. Like, you are that for you, and you don't need someone else's guidance or tutorials or mentorship or whatever in order to tap into that, because it's already something that is inherently yours. You find other teachers as a means to be able to reconnect to that voice, not as a means to solely rely on that person or other people or other text or other experiences in order to have a personal or intimate relationship with your divine self, with your creative energy, with your God energy, with your relationship to your spiritual life. So I love this this prompt, and I want to really catalyze you all to remember that you are the guru in this situation, and I am the guru for my own life, and I know exactly what it is that I need. And if I am able to find ways to shift through enough of the bullshit, shift through enough of the chaos, shift through enough of the external voices, shift through enough of the noise, I can get back to that still place. And that's the point of being able to have experiences where we're working with other people. It's being able to shift through and shed the layers of our own bullshit so that we can actually hear the voice that's already innately and divinely and securely seated within us. I always say that whatever message comes up, and in our messy movement teacher training, like the prequel, essentially, last week, we talked about this idea that there's only one teacher. And the teacher is not you or you, it's not me, it's the work. The work is the teacher, and that's the thing that we're consistently coming back to. It's, really pulling ourselves out of this egoic place, or I should say harmful ego place, because there's a part of our ego that is not necessarily harmful, but there's also ways in which it can be distorted and embodied in a way that does create harm for ourselves and others around us. But there's it's coming out of that harmful egoic place that, like, one person is the sole voice for the thing that we're searching for, or the spiritual message that we're searching for, or the spiritual need that we are inquiring about. And that's just simply not true. The work is always the teacher. And that work embodies spirit, that work embodies the divine message, that work embodies the vortex of the thing that we're all trying to get back to, whether you're in the position of teacher or student. So as we're having these conversations this week, I really want you to continue to remember that you are the best teacher for your own life. You seek guidance from other people, but at the end of the day, you are still the teacher for your own life and for your own experience, and you always know what's best. I was thinking about, like, coming into this conversation for this week, I'm like, okay, what are some of the key questions that I think have come up in this conversation around, activating pleasure as a fuel and not some reward that we're working ourselves toward? And I realized that we really need to backtrack a couple steps and really talk about, like, what the fuck is self-care? Like, what does that even actually mean, right? there's so many different theories and concepts and memes and, you know, rants and manifestos and all of this that will tell you, you know, how you are or how you aren't practicing self-care. And, you know, I believe that they're all helpful. You know, like we, you know, I've found definite aha moments and a lot of things that I've come across, and definitely in my own journey over the last several years in really embodying and understanding and being entrenched in a sense of self-reverence and self-nourishment. I have found things that, you know, that really have stuck with me and that really allow for me to keep coming back to the place in my practice that I want to come back to. And that is the place of embodying my temptress, reclaiming my sexy, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, this concept of what does it mean to like reclaim your sexy and why is that a necessary thing. But today I want to talk about like what the fuck is self-care and why is that something that we actually need to do? What is that practice that is, you know, what is this practice that, you know, is constantly thrown around, and how can it actually benefit our lives? So there's three key components to self-care that I think are really crucial in our day-to-day experience and in our understanding of how can we actually embody this in a way that works for and fits into the messiness of our day-to-day life. And why do I say the messiness, right? Like, well, because all of our lives, none of our lives are a perfect, you know, self-care Instagram, you know, self-care production every day, all day. It's just not the reality, especially not now. We're all trying to figure out how to navigate work, a sense of life, a sense of maintaining our livelihood, of maintaining work, friendships, you know, our romantic relationships, family, etc., in the midst of going through a global pandemic. We are navigating one of the messiest things that we have probably, you know, navigated since, you know, since, you know, any of the attacks, you know, in our country, specifically within the US, in some years, maybe 10, 15 years, right? So how are we practicing taking time for ourselves? How are we practicing accessing pleasure when there is an urgent sense of crisis all around us every day? And why is it necessary to continue to make that time for ourselves, even in the midst of the things that are going on? And one thing that's coming to mind for me is something that I shared with a member in our Messy Movement Lab the other day, as she was sharing that, like, you know, she's really challenged by taking the time to slow down in the midst of having to do the things that she does for her family, you know, preparing their meals, making sure the house is in order, getting the things together that they need, you know what I mean? Like all of the things that, you know, mothers do in order to make sure that their families are running and not losing and not pulling at their own sense of sanity, right? And what I said to her was, the care that is given is the vessel that the care comes from is just as important as the care that is given or provided. And sometimes we can really overvalue the care that is provided to people around us, whether that be in your family, in your relationship, you know, with your parents, with your children, with your work, with your clients, whatever the case may be. We can overvalue that care, but not value where it actually comes from, the vessel that makes the space and has the capacity to be able to provide all of the things that's being provided. And when we devalue the vessel that care comes from, quickly the vessel begins to deteriorate in ways that, you know, we can bounce back from. But when we get into this consistent practice of always putting that vessel last, the amount of care or the capacity for care or the ability to even be able to show up and do that work, one, becomes less enjoyable, two, becomes, you know, a source of frustration and resentment and fear and anger, because we're not pouring back into the vessel that's giving all of this energy out. And so I know that it's a really difficult concept to integrate into, you know, day-to-day life, especially when you're navigating being a caretaker for a number of people. But I want to continue to charge you all to find your 5 minutes. Find your 5 minutes where you can activate an opportunity for yourself to just be still. Find that 5 minutes where you can activate a sense to just, take a walk, to disconnect from social media, to do the little things that will help you to refuel yourself and pour back into yourself. Because if you care about the work that you are providing for the people that you love, or that are in your life, or that you're doing this work for, then you must care about the vessel from which that care actually comes from. Because otherwise, the care will have a legacy, but the vessel will not. So when we think about really 3 components of creating a self-care practice, or like what self-care is, even, we're thinking about this idea of self-nourishment, self-love and reverence, and self-intimacy. So I'm gonna go back through that in, just in a second, but I want to talk about some of the reasons why I think that many people will talk about like this idea of like, oh, well, your self-care isn't like a bubble bath or buying nice things for yourself. And, but it's more rooted in like these cognitive behavioral shifts, setting boundaries, being very, diligent about your time, thinking about the things that you desire and want for yourself. And the thing is that all of it is true. What our self-care practice does for us is allows for us to be able to pour back into ourselves so that we're not constantly running on E. The example that I gave yesterday was talking about the sense of this car. If we know that we have this car that we want to be able to go 100,000 miles, we know that this car needs to have an oil change at some point. It needs to have really decent gas in the car. You can't stop and get cheap dollar gas. You got to put some real gas in the car, because otherwise you set yourself up for an entire line of, problems with the way in which the car is going to run. At some point you're going to have to change out the windshield wipers. You're going to put some air in the tires. You're going to put, you might even have to change the tires out at some point. But there's a sense of consistent maintenance that is required in order for that car to run properly. And so if we're thinking about that, right, like we never question like, oh, the gas tank is on E, but I'm actually gonna go 100 miles, like some of us will actually try to, push the car. We're like, I got it. I can keep going. But in theory, we know that if the gas tank is running close to E, we know for sure we're not getting ready to go 100 miles. It's just not possible. It's not, I'm going to keep pushing it. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to try and see what happens, because we know at some point that car is going to be like, oh, okay, well, there's no gas, so I can't run. And our bodies and our spirits and our minds work in the same way. If we're not putting any gas or any fuel in the car, in the body, in the spirit, in this vessel, it stops running. And what does it stop running look like in our day-to-day lives? Well, it looks like, it's stress, overwhelm of stress, anxiety, depression, experiencing like a sense of loss of enjoyment of the things that you normally enjoy. It's constantly being stressed out. It's constantly being in this space where you feel like you're never able to really catch up. It's feeling like you're not in a space where where it feels like you're always needed, but never actually able to, give me one second, you all, never actually able to do the things that you want to be able to do for yourself, because you're always in a position where you're giving and giving and giving and overextending. And that becomes, while for many of us that may feel very enjoyable, but at some point that thing, that constant giving and never being replenished starts to feel, it gets old and it gets tiring. And it's like, we get into a place where we're, only taking the things that we feel like we're being given, and not actually asking for the things that we want, not actually asking for what it is that we need, starving our own appetite for life in order to be of substance for other people. And, at the end of the day, where does that actually leave us? It leaves us with nothing. And so, this language around self-care has definitely been commodified, like, you know, like over, you know, specifically over the last 8 years. What started out as a movement to help people, and what I have seen specifically Black women come back to a sense of rest and a sense of self-reverence in the midst of navigating a consistent experience of trauma in our day-to-day lives, just being Black in, you know, the US, or being Black anywhere, definitely has turned into, you know, cute memes, you know, an over focus on one aspect of self-care that then essentially, what's the word? Essentially kind of makes the other pieces of it like less important. You know what I mean? Like when we're over focusing on buying nice things, or over focusing on, you know, taking a cute bath, or over focusing on, you know, like how, like the aesthetic piece of self-care, then the other components of it don't get as much air, don't get as much wind. And those pieces are also integral to the aspect of creating, to the process of creating a fulfilling self-care practice that actually does something for your life, and not something that's just like for the performance of self-care, right? And that's why I say it's like this process of messy movement is really about fitting the practice into the messy parts of your life. How do you practice self-care when you're grieving? How do you practice self-care when you're experiencing loss? How do you practice self-care when you're tired? How do you practice self-care when you're pissed off, when you're arguing with your spouse, when your kids are acting a fucking fool? Like, how do you practice self-care when you're arguing with your parents about their well-being? Like, how do you practice self-care when your work is overextending your boundaries? How do you practice self-care when you have no privacy, when you feel like your work comes before your own self and your own well-being? How do you practice it in the messy parts of our journey? And these are the things that these are the questions that we're actually grappling with. And, you know, what I find to be true is that, you know, over focusing on one aspect of the process really, it trivializes what is supposed to be a healing process, or healing, or something that allows for us to come back to our great sense of self. And so, you know, I'm looking at my notes here to make sure that I'm on track, you all. And also, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in. There's like a little a little box with a question mark on it. You can drop those there. And then at the end, I will go to them and then I will answer them. So please, if you have questions or anything, you can comment or drop them in that box, and I'll jump to them in just a second. So I was doing a little bit of research, and to, you know, and thinking about, you know, myself, I'm a Black queer femme. I've definitely had experiences around where my health and well-being has been compromised as a result of not having a consistent self-care practice. When I was about I was in my early 20s, my blood pressure was near stroke level, okay? I was in a space and in a relationship that was not, you know, to my benefit. I was, you know, I had extreme self-doubt, extreme self-criticism. I was carrying all of this trauma that one was getting no help with processing, didn't know what to do with. My trauma was kind of just like standing in front of me as like a guard, you know, like there was no separation between me and the things that I had experienced in my past, or even in the things that I was experiencing at that present time. And so that was kind of my, you know, I was living through and trying to navigate through all of this stress, all this unprocessed pain, all of this, you know, unhealed energy, and also trying to figure out like how to survive in the midst of all of that. And, you know, to say the least, like it was really fucking hard, right? And so, you know, I was taking my baths, and I was even doing my dance practice at the time. And I still wasn't finding the sense of relief that I really needed in order to actually in order to actually get to a place of self-reverence, in order to get to a place in my life where I felt like I was valuing the vessel that was showing up in all these spaces that I actually cared about. And also the vessel that was showing up in those spaces, and my spirit wasn't being valued in the spaces that I was inhabiting. And that's a whole nother story. But, you know, that's also a part of our practice of self-reverence. It's honoring that, or making sure that our bodies, our spirits, our minds are being honored in the spaces that we're inhabiting. And at that time in my life, like, that wasn't the case. I couldn't even conceptualize of this experience of being valued fully. And one, because it was something that I had, you know, struggled with like all my life. And so, you know, also being, when I was in when I was in a place of experiencing, you know, harm or you know, painful, like, interpersonal reactions, I had no way to navigate it other than kind of like to brunt through and just get through it, and to, you know, make the best of it and try to figure it out, and, you know, like just riding for it, and, you know, doing all these things. And I literally pushed myself to the point of nearly having a stroke. Like, my blood pressure was at 220 over 110 at some point, or something like that. I have to go back and find it, because I actually wrote an article for blackdoctor.org talking about this experience of like how the stress of, you know, not allowing ourselves to experience self-reverence, self-love, you know, and really listening up to our discernment and our intuition in the midst of trying experiences can, you know, ultimately deteriorate our own health. And I stayed in that experience for so long that it disrupted my own connection to self. And so coming back into that, finding the practices, the tools, the understanding, the cognitive behavioral shifts that were needed so that I was no longer putting myself in these harmful situations or staying in these harmful situations was, you know, would be necessary. But, you know, and also that process took a long time. And, you know, I want to say, for anybody on here who's a survivor of, you know, domestic violence, whether it be with your family or whether it be in an intimate partner relationship, you know, it takes time to learn and make those shifts. And it, you know, especially when you don't have or didn't grow up with those tools, or didn't see what healthy love looked like, or didn't see healthy partnership, or didn't see healthy family dynamics, or didn't see it at all, whether it was healthy or not, or you had, you know, experiences that were really challenging for you in, you know, in your development. It takes time to learn those skills, and you can't always learn them on your own. You can push forward as much as you want, but sometimes you need that external eye and that external voice to be able to get to a place where you actually feel a sense of relief, and you can navigate, you can have a game plan for how to navigate the desires that you have, and also relearning how to value yourself. And so when we talk about this idea of self-love and self-reverence, it's really about coming back to a sense of our own true power and the truth about ourselves, right? There are some changeless facts that we must know about ourselves. And I pull the idea and the concept of changeless facts from the course, metaphysical text, of Course in Miracles. And it talks about there are some changeless facts about ourselves that we must know. And to paraphrase, those facts are: we are loved. Not because of what we do, not because of who we are, not because of the work that we do on Instagram or Facebook, or how many followers we have, or how many likes we get, or, you know, how much money our business is making, or how much money you're making at your work, or whether or not you have a partner, whether or not they put a ring on it. Like, none of that shit even fucking matters at the end of the day. Like, there are some changeless facts about ourselves, and one of those being that we are loved regardless of the things that we've been through, regardless of the things that have happened or have not yet happened in our lives. We are loved, we are needed, we are valued, we are beautiful, we are strong, we are inherently resilient, we are worthy. Not because of any of these external factors, but simply because we exist, simply because there is life moving and pushing through our bodies. We are worthy, we are loved, we are beautiful, we are needed, and we are valuable in this life. And coming back to that sense of truth, whenever we find ourselves in situations and in experiences, wherever it may be in our lives, that challenge that, or that bring a sense of self-doubt, or that bring a sense of self-criticism, or that bring a sense of anxiety that, we're never going to have the things that we want, or that we're never going to make it, or that our careers are never going to take off, or that we're never going to find love, or that we're never going to have the right friendships, or we're never going to be recognized for the value that we bring into the world, or whatever lies our mind begins to fixate on and then embody. We have to one, have a sense of self-awareness, that we pull ourselves back from that space and pull ourselves back into the energy of what Abraham Hicks calls the vortex, so that we can really tap into the truth about who we are. And if we believe that we are, from a Christian perspective, and take, tweak, or toss, as Ajani says. My love, Ajani says, take, tweak, or toss whenever they start to give me feedback, and I'd be like, I definitely have given them the purse lips, but I appreciate that prompt, because it's like, again, remembering that you are the guru for your own life. You're the boss. You're the person that gets to make the decisions, or take the meat and spit out the bones. But from a Christian perspective, if we think, that we are made in God's image, or that we are in the likeness of God, then we have to, what do we believe God to be if we believe that we are something other than all of the things, all of the great things that we desire and want for our lives, all of the great things that we believe that we can embody over the course of our lives? If we don't believe that we are that, but we see, God, spirit, universe, please use whatever language feels fulfilling for you, in that light, then how do we not see ourselves in the same way? How do we not call ourselves, seduce ourselves, bring ourselves back into that sense of understanding and knowing, in order to really recenter ourselves in the truth about our lives? If we continue to believe the lie, then we, one, leak. That's a leak in our gas tank, right? You can do all of the self-care you want. You can do all of the, tangible practices of self-care, like your baths, or taking a walk, or working out, or dressing yourself up, doing your aesthetic, doing your makeup, and all of this. But if there's a leak or a hole in the place where your self-reverence is supposed to exist, it doesn't matter what else you're doing. That thing is always going to be taking fuel away from you, and it's always going to bring you back to the space where you feel like you're constantly fighting, no matter what, all of the things that you're doing around you. It's going to feel like you're constantly fighting to, just even get back to zero, because you're always being depleted, because there's that hole in that space where self-reverence should exist. We also have to cultivate a sense of self-intimacy. This is the second component of having a self-care practice. We have to cultivate a sense of self-intimacy where we are our best lover, where we are the person that we've been waiting for. And we talk about this in class, especially when we're beginning to do our opening movement practice, about putting that energy of your own love, of your own adoration, of your own attention, of your own affection into your hands. It's about not waiting for someone else to give you permission to access the thing that was inherently given to you. It wasn't given to someone else to then give to you, for you to experience, for them to take away, and then they go about it, and you're constantly waiting for them, or waiting for someone else to be able to come back to give you access to this thing. It's about you being able to understand that that energy exists within your own hands, and you are responsible for cultivating that energy. You are responsible for your pleasure. You are responsible for your own ecstasy, and no one else gives you permission to experience that. You give yourself the permission to experience that energy, and that experience, and that joy of aliveness. And unfortunately, for many of us, who for many of us, and especially myself, like I grew up in the Black church. I grew up under, very conflicting understandings of what pleasure and sex and God and, all of these things were supposed to mean for me. And then understanding or coming into my own understanding of being a queer Black girl, I really didn't have a lot of direct guidance about how to, one, have self-reverence for my identity and all of who I am, and then also how to make sense of the conflicting messages that I was getting between the church and what I knew was coming up for me, and what I now understand to just be like, human development. And so when we're thinking about cultivating a sense of self-intimacy, it can get really hard because we are not conditioned to believe that our pleasure is important. We're conditioned to believe that pleasure is something that we give to someone else, and it's a reward that we are gifted once some man gives us the honor of marrying us into our permission to experience pleasure. And that's kind of the ideology and framework that many of us who grew up in the Black church and even just under the ideology of Christianity, that it's always this waiting. It's always, you're most pure if you wait. You're most lovable if you're not too flamboyant about your experience around your sexuality. And you're most worthy if you allow yourself to, reserve this part of yourself for the bedroom. You're most worthy if, you don't have a lot of sexual partners. You're most worthy if you never have, had the experience of an abortion. And if you did, then you don't talk about it because that's shameful. Because if you talk about the fact that you had an abortion, if you talk about the fact that you've had sex, if you have multiple sexual partners, then you're damaged. And this shit is just not true. It's harmful. And also thinking about just the way in which our bodies are even invited into church spaces. We're not often able to, it's very rare that we're able to have experiences around our body in a church space that are our own. Immediately upon coming into many church spaces, it is, about what your body looks like. And, depending on, where you fall on the scale of being voluptuous, how much you need to cover up, how much you need to tone down, how much you need to mute. And, as someone who grew up in praise dance and, seeing the evolution of how praise dance, within the Black church, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, the progression in the attire, from just wearing a leotard and tights and a skirt and very much emulating what everyone saw, from Alvin Ailey with Revelations, right? Like the flesh tone tights from Danskin, the 1331s. My mom owned a dancewear store, y'all. So these numbers are ingrained in my spirit. The shimmery flesh tone tights, your shimmery Danskin leotard, your white skirt with the ruffle. And that was it. That was initially what we wore. But then as, praise dance became more acceptable in the church, there became all of these rules and regulations about how the body could even be presented. And when asked, what is the reason for this tempering, the response is always so that the dancers, who are almost predominantly women and girls, do not tempt the congregation into sin. And the church puts and participates in this practice of reinforcing rape culture by blaming the victim for the thoughts and for the actions of the perpetrator. And this is something that when you grow up in that space, and when you live in that space, and when those ideologies follow you, even after you left that space, it's hard to unlearn those practices and to come back to, or to find a new paradigm to exist within for your own life. And it gets really challenging because there's also many people that there's not always a lot of people around you who are doing that same work. And so it feels very challenging to stay avoid or be invested in that energy and in that experience when it seems like everybody else around you is following a different rule and seemingly their life is going better, or they're reaching the milestones or goals that, you know, were set up for us, that we were believed to be the pinnacle of success in terms of being a woman. And so it's hard to start to find a way to embody something new when it feels like the rules or the way in which we've been taught or indoctrinated into the sense of womanhood, or into the sense of embodying the divine feminine, you know, that this is the only way. Or, and then if we break those rules, the pain and the discomfort and the disconnection that we start to feel, sometimes within our friend group, sometimes with our family, sometimes within our, you know, with our children, whatever the case may be, it just gets really hard. But when we're thinking about it, the CDC says that Black women have a 3-year shorter lifespan average than white women, and many of those root causes are based in stress. Now, on the other side of that, the stress hormone is cortisol. So when we're, and that cortisol can also put us into a constant state of fight or flight. And just being Black in America can put you in a space of constant fight or flight. And it creates a sense of, you know, feeling very uncomfortable and disconnected and not wanting to be in the body, which creates a sense of disassociation, which doesn't allow for us to actually enjoy the experiences of pleasure that we do have. And so combined with the ideology that we're trying to fight from, you know, whatever religious institutions that we grew up in, combined with this experience of disassociation just from our daily lived experience of, you know, being in our bodies, we have this double messaging that pleasure is just not something that is for us. It's a luxury. It's for somebody else. And that could be no further from the truth. I have to find a quote. I believe someone sent me a quote, and I don't want to say it because I want to make sure that I quote the author, but I'm going to put it in my stories after this. But that overproduction of cortisol leads to more stress, leads to anxiety, leads to depression, leads to an increase in our risk for heart disease. But one of the things that fights, you know, this overproduction of cortisol, this overproduction of this stress hormone is, I don't know if I'm saying it right, oxytocin, right? So it's the release of this, it's like a happy hormone, right? And a lot of times we can access that vibe, that chemical release through pleasure, whether that's through an orgasmic experience with a partner or with yourself. And sometimes it can even be without having sex at all. It's just the release of this energy in the body, this release of this chemical in the body that allows for there to be a pain reduction. But if we already have this double or negative messaging around what it means to access pleasure, then how do we ever get to a place where we feel like this is something that we should use or cultivate or activate as a part of our actual wellness plan or regimen? So finally, the final part of the components of our self-care practices is self-nourishment. And that's literally the tools and the practices that we're using to remind our bodies and to trigger our muscle memory into a space where it understands that rest is possible, that pleasure is good, that we deserve to slow down. It's, you know, it's your bath time, it's tea time, it's going out with your friends, it's talking to your friends, it's doing your hair, doing your makeup, just finding different ways to bring a sense of worship and adoration to your own self. And that's a really big part of the process. Yes, it can't be the only piece of the process, but it's a major piece of it. And within religions of the Pan-African diaspora specifically, I know for a fact that, you know, self-care bath rituals are a thing. And so when I hear people say that, you know, baths are not, you know, they're not self-care, I'm like, well, it's just not true. And again, it's, you know, if we're thinking about self-care from a Eurocentric lens, perhaps, but, you know, when we're thinking about the practices and the rituals that are ancient to our history, to our culture, to our understanding, you know, viscerally, then, these are practices that our ancestors and our elders have been doing for years, for centuries and lifetimes, that have really brought us back to a sense of grounding, a sense of understanding, and a sense of connection to our bodies and our spirits, and to, a greater understanding about who we are on a divine or cosmic level. So I want to pause here because I am sweating. I want to pause here and see what questions and stuff have come up. Let me see. I think I've got 3 questions here. Okay. Let's see. My messy movement has been, how do I feel good consistently to do, yes, my own hair and workouts, consistent self-care when not feeling, I feel like I'm not seeing all of this. Okay. We've got a lot of spam. Oh, let's see here. Okay, someone's asked, how do you practice self-care if you feel like you're behind with your work and you feel like you can't take a break? It's not letting me see the full question, you all, so I apologize. But how do you practice self-care when you feel like you're behind with your work? You know what? We talked about this a little bit yesterday, and the big thing for me was like, you just must, right? Like there are times when I don't want to. I don't want to slow down. Like I'm in a space where I know I'm like, oh, I'm in a good flow. I'm writing something good, or I've got a new idea or whatever. But I know that I'm not going to have much access to that or much capacity to be able to do that thing if I don't slow down and just refuel myself. And so playtime is necessary. And I want you to think about it, being curious about like, what are some things that you can do for play? Like, let's take the whole idea and concept of self-care off the table, right? Let's make it less serious, right? Like what things can you do to just give yourself a fucking break, right? Like, whether it's taking a quick walk, going outside and laying in the grass, or maybe it's, I've gotten Play-Doh recently. And so like just giving my mind a mental break, an opportunity to just slow down and look at something else and then come back to it. And again, your self-care practice doesn't have to be this deep, involved ritual each and every time. It can literally start with 5 minutes. So how can you master a 5-minute practice? How can you master taking 5 minutes for yourself every so often? Because the point is not to like, stop for 3 hours of self-care one time in the month and then you're filled. The point is to stop and refuel the tank every day, and understanding that your work does not survive if you, the vessel, is not full. If you, the vessel, cannot operate or see clearly or doesn't feel good. Think about what happens when you get sick. And if we're constantly pushing to do our work up until the point where we're in crisis, or up until the point where we break down and we're sick and we're tired and our brain is tapped out and we pissed off and, we telling our boss, fuck you and all of this, like, if we keep pushing to that point, like, we're no longer practicing self-care. We're operating from a place of crisis management. And that means that, ultimately, like, we're still in the negative when it comes to the tank, and we're trying to get it back up to just 0. So the 5-minute deposits that we're doing, these 5-minute breaks, is about, one, making the practice tangible to the life that you have right now, tangible to the experiences and the space that you have available to you right now. And if that doesn't look like a 3-hour self-care production where you've got all your candles and your flowers and your wine and your this and your that, okay, it doesn't matter. But 5 minutes does matter. So, and the work will be so much better for it. I hope that answers your question. Let me see. I think that the rest of the comments that I have here are spam. So I'm going to look through here to see if there's any other questions. But if not, let me see here. thank you all so much for being here with me today. I'm like, again, like I said, like doing these conversations and doing this work in this way is, it's a little nerve wracking. Like I told you all, like I am profusely sweating right now because it's different from being able to be in the room with you, to look at your faces, to see the things that are coming up for you, or to be able to answer your questions on the spot. So I appreciate y'all rolling with me as I kind of navigate my notes, and also navigate like being in this and trying to make sure that I'm, in the space and communicating this message in a way that makes sense. Thank you all so much for joining me. If you are ready to start to activate a practice for yourself, and you want some simple and tangible tools that you can start to activate to really come back to a place of self-love and self-reverence, self-nourishment, and self-intimacy, I want you to go ahead to the link in my bio, and I want you to purchase the $9 mini course, Pleasure is Our Fuel and Not a Reward. Again, if you all have any questions for me, please feel free to send me a message or to comment on my page. I'm going to put up a little mini recap video of this. And I will talk to you all soon. Happy Tuesday. Bye. Did not say.